Developed by Sega's Sonic team and released in 1992, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is the second entry in the famous first-party platforming series. The series villain Dr. Ivo Robotnik has returned, using the animals he converts into automatons to build his Death Egg weaponized platform. Thankfully, Sonic isn't alone. Players are introduced to Miles Tails Prower, Sonic's new sidekick, and the spin dash mechanic, which lets players rev up for a speedy dash to plow through enemies and reveal hidden areas. Players can choose to play as either Sonic or Tails, but the game defaults to both on screen at once, allowing a second player to optionally control the Vulpine partner for simultaneous cooperative platforming. Even better, Tails doesn't have a ring count or lives to worry about, making him a terrific choice for a second player to contribute without impeding Player 1's progress as Sonic. That's not to say Player 2 isn't also ran. When it comes time to battle bosses, a second player as Tails is an invaluable asset to thwarting the rotund rabble-rousers' robotic roadblocks. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 features some of the series' most memorable levels. Emerald Hill provides a familiar rebuild of Green Hill, while Chemical Plant, Aquatic Run, Casino Night, and Mystic Cave are aesthetically appealing. Masato Nakamura, composer for both Sonic 1 and 2, give each stage a vibrant melody that fits its theme to a T. Things also take mechanical turns with the scrolling Sky Chase, the methodical Wing Fortress, and the final solo trip into the Death Egg, where a flawless run is required to defeat the 1-2 boss punch of Mecha Sonic and the Death Egg robot. The special stages in Sonic the Hedgehog 2 were also a hit. Collect 50 rings and tag up a checkpoint to reveal a portal that takes you to an over-the-shoulder pipe dash. Collect rings and avoid bombs to snag one of the 7 Chaos Emeralds, which, if obtained, unlock Super Sonic. On top of that, players could compete in a 2-player split-screen battle, racing on a shared playfield, though the tricks behind the scenes making that work did cause some slowdown issues, and also made it incompatible with our recording solution. Any discussion of the early Sonic titles has to include a mention of Yuji Naka, a programmer for Sega's AM8 development team whose prototype became the first Sonic game. Naka programmed or produced over a dozen Sonic titles in his almost quarter-century of work with the company, as well as hits like Phantasy Stars 1 and 2, Phantasy Star Online, Samba de Amigo, Nights into Dreams, and Choo Choo Rocket. When Sonic the Hedgehog 1 met with massive critical acclaim, the Sega AM8 development team was rebranded as Sonic Team. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 had another iconic member on its team, Mark Cerny, who worked as a producer for Sega Technical Institute, or STI, in California. Though it would be his own last credit for the company, Cerny wisely brought Yuji Naka in, along with designer Hirokazu Yoshihara. Later on, Sega would develop the Sonic & Knuckles cartridge add-on. Using this makes Knuckles playable in Sonic 2, including his drift mechanic, which is a fun way to add some replay value to the older title without changing too much otherwise. Besides its Sega Genesis origins, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is available on the 3DS Virtual Console and on mobile devices via Sega Forever. The latter of these is absolutely worth checking out since it's got the finished Hidden Palace Zone that was previously dropped from the original version of the game. But for the purest experience, get that 3-button Genesis controller in your hands and take a spin with Sonic at the height of his powers. Thoughts?
So I love the timing of this game because when you get the NES and the generation of gamers that spawned, a lot of times you're talking, kids are like 8, 9, 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Then the 16-bit games come out. Super Nintendo comes out. Sega Genesis comes out. These kids might have younger siblings who they want to share their love of gaming with. And the mechanic of Tails in this game is just the perfect little brother game because Tails can't die.
Right.
Tails falls off a cliff, he's right back in the game. He runs into an enemy, he's right back in. Tails is immortal.
And it is, I mean, we pin this down in gameplay, that little brother thing, right? It is unique to this game. There are not too many things, certainly prior to it. We had a lot of cooperative games, a lot of, hot seat, taking turns, controller 1, controller 2, or whatever. But to have a game where a second player can jump in and control, and all they can do is help, right?
Right.
No skill barrier really is going to cause an issue. They can't, they don't even impede, you scrolling through things or, come on, we need to go through this door or something. If they get left behind, they get left behind. How many times do you hear, bom, 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 bom? Because
too many times.
Right, because Sonic is, blasting through these levels, and as Tails, you do your best to keep up, and whatever you do or you don't. But then even, incidentally, whether it's, intentional or unintentional, Tails turns out to be super useful because you can just throw yourself at the boss with abandon.
Right.
So, no, you're right. It is refreshing in that sense. And Sonic the Hedgehog, like the first one and the second one, they exist in this really sort of unique space where we're at the height of the console wars, right? So there was a period where Nintendo had somewhere between like 90 and 95% of the US market. They were just destroying the Master System.
Yeah.
The Genesis comes out, they advertise blast processing, Sega does what Nintendo don't. Like, the system does well for a while, but they don't have their breakout hit.
Right.
They finally get it with Sonic the Hedgehog 1. And it shows off everything that makes the Genesis appealing. The ability to kind of scroll as quickly as it does, and to go through all this content in this sort of rapid way that's still bright and colorful, and the drum and bass stuff that is so great because the Genesis has the two chips working in tandem to give you that great sound. But the second Sonic game basically just polishes up everything. It cleans up the design. Like Emerald Hill is basically Green Hill, and it just does everything a little bit better. And even found a way to deal with sort of what was the one thing that Sonic 1 didn't really have, which was multiplayer, right? I mean, you could like pass off the controller or something, but it didn't have that multiplayer option. And bringing that in here, even though it didn't work super well with the split screen necessarily, like it worked really well with the second player.
Absolutely. And what I really like about that mechanic is Sonic's a really hard game.
Right.
Like, I've never beaten this game by myself. I've never beaten any Sonic game by myself. I'm not a huge, platformer wizard or anything like that. But, another great thing about playing as Tails, you get to practice the game as much as you want with no consequences. You get someone like you. Like, I suck at this game. I played as Tails. I died a lot.
I scrolled you a few times, but...
Well, sure, but I'm still falling off of pits and stuff like that. And, just having an experienced Sonic player there, letting Tails practice as much as he can, getting a feel for the mechanics and the play style, it's just super invaluable and another way to get people into the game.
Right.
But, yeah, with Sonic the Hedgehog, Sega Genesis, they had the superior technology. They had a really darn good marketing program in place. They just didn't have a game that showcased all of that, and I wonder if the game would have put Sega as much on the map as it did if Sonic wasn't as marketable a mascot character.
Yeah, no, there's some fun stories. I dug up a couple interviews while I was researching for the review, and there are fun stories about, like, the team at Sega of America looking at the original concept sketches for like Sonic and Robotnik and all these characters, and like, do you think we can market these? And they're looking at them and like, because they're not sure, they take them to like Sega of America's marketing team, and the marketing team just like butchers them. It's like, none of these characters will ever work. This doesn't look right. Like, totally redo everything. And so there is that sort of gap between West and East that still kind of exists here. Nintendo of America was doing its best to market Nintendo's games, but they were distinctly Japanese games, and Sega service games, coming out of Hawaii and then kind of going into Japan and being there. Sonic Team was distinctly Japanese, and when they came in to work on Sonic 2, they were working with some really fresh-faced, like, Western developers, and, like, Mark Cerny's really the only big name I recognized on the credits list from the U.S. team.
Right.
As I understand it, after Sonic 2, Cerny leaves to go do other stuff. He starts working on, like, 3DO games and other things, and the Sonic team moves back to Japan. I think Sonic 2 might have been the only time that they were like fully interoperating with like the US branch the way they were. But there's sort of this big debate in Sonic games, and I want to touch on this before I forget it. This idea of how the level design works in Sonic. For the most part, I think you and I agreed, like, the levels are really, really good in this game. Like, they look great, they sound great, you do slightly different things in them. Casino Night Zone is great for just kind of putzing around with the gambling thing and going through the slots, and it has the plungers and the flippers, so there's a little bit of pinball going on too. Then you have the aquatic zones and all the dangers that come from that, because like that's one of the most memorable things about Sonic games is that dreaded like drowning sound.
Oh, the music! Oh my god!
Right, and the fear that instills, and then. In Sky Chase, turning it into like, well, it's an auto scroller, and the difficulties and weirdness that comes from trying that out.
Right.
I think we agreed that even though it was something different, we didn't really care for Wing Fortress.
Yeah.
Because like it was very slow and methodical jumping, and it was something that really the game had not asked you to do before that point to the same extent.
One of the things that I thought was crazy was that you look at the first, whatever, 4 or 5 stages, or however many it was before you get to Wing Fortress. Every jump, the level design had so much flow to it that it's almost like they considered each jump, each ramp that you can launch Sonic off of. It's like they thought, okay, well, you can hit this ramp at this speed, or this speed. Let's get a ramp at each speed to catch him. It's like no matter what angle you take, no matter what approach you take to each jump, you're going to land in a way that it makes it feel like that was the right jump to take.
Yeah, and that was the branching thing that they developed for this game. And I think that was one of the smartest things they did is the level design in Sonic 2 accounts for just about any way you go through it. If you're the kind of person who's going to dig around and snoop behind you and use spin dash to try to find breakable walls or secret passages to find extra lives or other rewards, the game has them there for you. If you're the kind of person who's going to go as fast as you can possibly go so you can hit every ramp and every loop-to-loop and blitz through the level, the game accommodates for that. The level design is smart enough to account for those different playstyles, and failing or succeeding at each of those and the consequences that come along with them, it doesn't pigeonhole you into sort of a very, very linear progression.
Right.
But on the other hand, that design starts to break down the more you experiment with the play style. Obviously, Sky Chase, you can't really do a lot of that because it's an auto scroller and there are no branching paths in it. They could have, in theory, had been like be on the top half of the screen to go up, be on the bottom half of the screen to go down, or something. Or in Wing Fortress, where you're in a very clearly constrained area and failure is plummeting to your death.
Right, and there's one path to take.
Right. I think we found that like limited exception was that one jump early on where you could skip like a third of the level.
Yeah, the one shortcut.
Right, yeah. But and then Death Egg, taking away Tails and being Sonic only and no rings, so you have to do it perfectly, and then having to kind of throw yourself at the bosses and learn their mechanics to memorize it, it's discordant. It's a little different from the way the rest of the game plays. And It's not that they're necessarily bad by themselves. It's they don't feel like they fit in the way that the first 6 or 7 levels of this game just flow so beautifully.
And I don't know if I touched this. I might have touched on this when we did the actual recording of the game itself. But like, it's almost like the first few stages when you're in Emerald Hill or Casino Night or any of these other actual stages. It's like you're in Sonic's world. This is perfectly tailored to his strengths. It's all about speed, momentum, and it all plays to Sonic's strengths. Then you start getting into Robotnik's territory, and suddenly your strengths become your weaknesses. It's almost like, I don't know if they planned on that, but
it flows nicely from a narrative perspective. Yeah, I mean, you'd always want to give them the benefit of the doubt, I guess, wherever possible. And then something else I wanted to talk about is a lot of games from that period, Nintendo in like the late 80s, a couple years prior. In 1985, 86, you get like a lot of these Mario 1, Zelda 1, you get the first Castlevania game from Konami. A lot of those NES games are famous for having sequels that are very divergent from the original. Mario 2 US, anyway, not counting Lost Levels or whatever, Mario 2 US is very different than Super Mario Brothers, right? The second Castlevania game is drastically different from the first one.
Right.
The second Legend of Zelda game completely turns the first Legend of Zelda game on its head. And I think they were still feeling themselves out. Like, they were comfortable with the IP, but what's the game underneath it mean? And I think Sonic not having that experimentation very early on, when Sega realized they had a hit with the first Sonic the Hedgehog game, like, they knew this formula worked. They rode this formula all the way to the 3D era, right? I mean, Sonic 1, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, Sonic and Knuckles, right? All through the Genesis's lifespan. That was the formula. That was the game. And even Sonic CD has the same 2D I always forget the Gator's name.
Oh God,
Is it Chaos? Is it Chaos?
That was the name
Knuckles
of the
Chaotix
game
was one of the games,
yeah,
but
he was in it.
right. I'll throw it up on the screen here. I can never remember, but like
Oh,
even
that's what it was called.
yeah, right, duh. But even like when they were doing that ancillary stuff, that was kind of the game, and they did try things outside the box, right? Sonic Spinball,
Right.
Just the way Mario had Mario Kart. You know, put your character that's your most successful IP into other things, see if it works, see if it doesn't work.
Money.
Yeah, but generally speaking, Sega's solution to the Sonic games was not to go into an experimentation phase. And maybe this is because the Nintendo-Sega rivalry is like at fever pitch right now, but it's very much not a reinvent the wheel. It's keep doing other stuff. I did think a little bit about some of the Sonic games and how the Super Nintendo rolls out in 91 and it shows off Mode 7. I mean, Pilot Wings and F-Zero are showing all the scaling and rotation things that you can do. And I think Sonic the Hedgehog tackles a few of those, right? Like the first Sonic game has those bonus levels that are slowly rotating that you're trying to move around in.
Right.
So they can show off our system can do rotations too. The second game with these sort of pseudo 3D tunnels, which are actually like pre-rendered, and then like when you're running through them to grab all the rings, like, oh look, we can do sort of this cool pseudo 3D stylized stuff too. And then the third game where you're actually running on like the rotating sphere and like grabbing the balls, like the blue and red things to get through the level.
Right.
I feel like oftentimes these Sonic games were showcase opportunities to be like, anything you can do, we can do better. We can do anything better than you. And it wasn't always true necessarily, but it was a way for them to, with their flagship, their most recognizable title, continue to show the Genesis was hardware relevant to the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
So I think one of the problems that they had, do you think that they might have taking the same sort of approach of, oh, this is a great mechanic, this works, this play style, we're going to run with it. Do you think it kind of pigeonholed them into using a system that didn't really translate well to 3D when 3D games started rolling around?
I mean, that's a great thing to chew on because everyone knows Super Mario 64 is kind of one of these contentious titles, but it's generally agreed on to be a very good game.
Right.
And I think to their benefit, Nintendo's platforming champion is a game that is all about verticality and slow pace and methodical decision making, and even in like auto-scrolling levels or something, it's not a quick game.
Right.
Sonic succeeded as much as it did because the 2D nature of the game, you can make those incredible like reactive split-second things. Translate that 3D, and their solution early on, like with Sonic Adventure, was, okay, when we get to the really cool big loops or like running through this or jumping through this, automate it. And then when the player's moving around, they had them in this sort of this slower run around 3D space that just felt like Mario at like maybe 50% increased speed, but with fewer abilities, fewer jump styles. You didn't have triple jump, back jump, long jump, all those things. You had spin dash could now just be executed in the air, and it auto-targeted enemies.
Right.
What it ends up doing is, like you said, it's a shallower experience, combined with the increased liberties that the team started taking with a lot of like the writing and theme and direction of the game. Like the early games are very much as simple as Robotnik likes taking animals, shoving them into robots, which forces them to do things. That's not cool. Let's stop him from doing that. The later games start getting more and more and more narrative heavy. I think not necessarily to their benefit. And it does. The combination of sort of no longer having a game that's totally simpatico with the environment it's in and trying to tell a story while you are sort of laboring your way through it. I have fond memories of playing those games, but I think those games, the 3D Sonic games, are the first example of games where I really have to caution myself and like, I'm wearing rose-colored glasses. I'm remembering this from like, I have fond and nostalgic memories of it, but it's very easy to poke holes into it from a design point of view.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just like you said, narrative alone. And I think it's kind of funny, like with the 2D games. Sonic 1, you've got Sonic. Sonic 2, you got Sonic and Tails. Then you have Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. 3D games come around, and it's like, dear God, who are all these people? Suddenly you've got, what was it, 6 playable characters in Adventure, and then by the time the Wii and the Xbox 360 and even the GameCube had like 9 playable characters, and it's just adding to this roster that you don't really have a whole lot of explanation for.
And to be fair, Sonic was one of those franchises that had hit peak marketing, right? I mean, it had multiple different cartoons. It had the lunchbox, the T-shirt, right? Sega definitely milked it for all it was worth, and you can't blame it for that. I mean, that was... Sonic and Sega were synonymous from the moment the blue Hedgehog showed up on Sonic 1 pretty much to the end of, Sega's lifespan as a console developer. And even to this day, as a software producer, with Sega Forever being on mobile, one of the first things was like, well, what are the Sonic games going to play like on it? We now have the new Sonic games come out, and everyone's talking about Sonic Forces and Sonic Mania. And what is the general consensus that's been going around? Everyone seems to love Sonic Mania. No one seems to be totally enamored with Sonic Forces.
Yep.
And I think the fact that they're coming out almost simultaneously, with the reactions that they are getting, is very, very telling. I think it does kind of hammer home this idea that Sonic is, by its nature, such a unique experience from a 2D platforming perspective that they've never really worked out how to get that look and feel going in the 3D world. And that's not to say that there haven't been good 3D Sonic games. I liked Sonic Colors.
Yeah, that's fair.
I liked Sonic Generations, which was not just cool from a nostalgic perspective. You got to go back and play these older things, and that like you played as Little Sonic and Big Sonic or whatever. But I just thought it was a fun game overall, and I loved the weird UI in that game. Like when you're doing level selecting, that big empty void of white where you're like walking past the zones to go into them. It felt a little fourth wallish.
That's kind of what they were going for, though. I mean, it's basically an homage to itself.
Right, but it's one of those things where it's you have to kind of be like, well, are we just praising this game because it's a 2D Sonic games and the 2D Sonic games are good, or are we just lambasting it because it's a 3D Sonic game and 3D Sonic games are bad? It's really easy to get caught up in like that wave, and I think being as objective about this as possible, I think we're in fair agreement here that Sonic 2 is, despite that pre-based opinion, still really good, despite the fact that we tend to praise 2D Sonics and not to praise 3D Sonics.
Honestly, I feel like the real reason we don't praise 3D Sonic games is because the mechanics, you're literally just playing a 2D side-scroller from a different perspective. Like, when you're going really fast, you don't really have a whole lot of control over where Sonic's going. You're still on rails. Mm-hmm. It's, for all intents and purposes, you might as well be playing a 2D game.
Right. Something that came up in our playthrough, we made fairly liberal use of the level select code.
Oh, yeah.
We were doing great until we hit like the major obstacle in this game, which is Wing Fortress and Death Egg. So Wing Fortress punishes you for missing jumps in a way that really no level prior to it does. Which means, unless you get comfortable enough going through it, you're going to have to play through the entire, 30, 45 minutes worth of game to get to, I guess at least, really, there's 7 levels with... Metropolis has 3 zones, Oil Ocean has 2, a lot of them.
Yeah, it's a lot of content.
Yeah, so you have to go through a lot of content just to get a few lives of practice on Wing Fortress. And then once you finally got good enough at Wing Fortress to get through that, way to go, congratulations, you get Death Egg. And Death Egg is one-hit death, memorizing Mecha Sonic, who has dashes that are... dashes that are below you or above you. And then once you've got his, you watched, in our playthrough, we're literally, robotic as Mecha Sonic himself. This time he goes under, this time he goes over, this time he goes under, hit him twice, 8 hits kills him.
It's not a look for the tells and then react accordingly. You have to memorize the pattern.
Right, because there are no tells in it.
Right.
And then you get to Death Egg Robot, and Death Egg Robot has a very weird hitbox where as he's walking, the needles in his hands are deadly, so you kind of just wait it out. We were kind of gating him or baiting him to the the far right of the screen, then spin dashing away so that we don't even have to dodge the hands, they can't reach us. Go back over to him when he's like landed, hit him once, repeat 12 times to kill him, right? And that's fine. Like, if your final boss has a gimmick or a mechanic that you can work out to beat him, I'm usually not opposed to that, because typically once people, like, get stuck on bosses and they go asking for help or looking for a thing, and they find out that this is a thing you can do, then, like, oh, great, okay, because they were getting to the point of frustration. If you're willing to stop playing something to go check for a source to figure out what to do, it's usually good that that thing exists, because then players can identify it and reference it and get past whatever they're stuck on. You don't want them to live in frustration forever. But that level select code was manna from heaven. I mean, it was absolutely necessary, because without it, I don't know that we can get enough trials, like with our schedule and when we record and when we're available to do this stuff. How do you get enough practice? You know, I guess if we had gone and like acquired an emulator for this and like just save stated or something,
yeah.
right? How do you get enough practice at Wing Fortress and Death Egg to be comfortable enough to knock these out? Now, we did not play as Supersonic, because it took us like forever to figure out, like, oh yeah, it's 50 rings and then go through the checkpoint thing.
Whoops.
But Supersonic, while it would have helped in Wing Fortress, you jump a little higher. I have a feeling like it may have trivialized that fight where we were battling like inside the Wing Fortress boss, where we had like the yellow beams blocking us in and we had to hit the things on the ceiling.
Yeah.
It probably trivializes that a little bit. But you can't be Supersonic in Death Egg. You have no coins.
Oh my
so
gosh.
you still have to do that as regular Sonic.
Yeah.
Which means you still have to go through all of these trials over and over and over and over and over again.
Jesus Christ.
No matter what. So that level select code is 19, 65, 09, 17 in the sound test, which 1965, September 17th, Yuji Naka's birth date.
Ha!
Like, I looked at it when we were putting it in, and I'm like, this has to be something. So as I'm doing the research for the review, I'm like, I bet. And sure enough, it is. And I don't know why I love that as much as I do. But when developers of games, and Yuji Naka was the programmer, like his prototype became Sonic the Hedgehog 1. And he had actually, like, they had kind of a tumultuous relationship with Sega. And it was Mark Cerny, I believe, that got him to, like, go into the Sonic 2, like, to come back. Not necessarily come back, because the team had moved to California. But, like, got him in and got the original level designer in and, like, worked with them and made Sonic 2.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's hard to make the same game over and over and over for, like, as many years as he did, because Yuji Naka was in there for the entirety of the 2D run. In fact, I believe he was on the Sonic team all the way through Sonic 06.
Oh, wow.
And
like left at Sonic 06.
I don't know
or
if he
after?
left mid-development
That would make a
or
lot
when
of
it was
sense.
done or beforehand, but I know that was about the time of his departure, around 2005, 2006. And so this was like, there were a lot of people at AM8, but this was, a lot of people kind of see this as like, this is his baby. This is the thing that, like, he's most identified with, for sure.
Right.
But on the other hand, like, just seeing something as small as a developer putting a personal stamp on a game like this, like having his birth date be the password, like the level select password thing.
It makes it personal.
It warms my heart. I love... It's the Robinette thing all over again, with adventure and his name being hidden in, like, the Easter egg, right? Whatever.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, these are games that are made by, like, human beings, remarkably enough. We haven't yet gotten to the point where AIs are writing their own games. I don't think we're necessarily too far off from that, but for the time being, they are still very personal artistic expressions. And it's just cool to see every now and then just a little reminder of the humanity that kind of goes in behind the scenes with this stuff.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's almost like a little signature.
Yeah. Anything else before we close this one up?
No, you know what? It's just such a great game, and it really it really epitomizes the extreme 90s, Like, I don't even know if Sonic was a product of the extreme sort of mentality of the early 90s, or if the early 90s extreme mentality was a byproduct of the Sonic games coming out.
Are you asking if this is a chicken or egg man?
Yes.
Oh, no! Yes! No! And on that, I think we're going to close it.
Thank you.
Thanks again for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you. Later.